Welcome to the Learning Cosmos podcast. I'm your host, André Hedlund, educational psychologist, author, geek, and nerd. This show brings you science and learning through conversations with stellar people from different fields. Put on your spacesuits and hold tight. Our voyage into the learner's universe begins now. And welcome, folks, to another episode of the Learning Cosmos podcast. I have a very special guest today, Dr. Antonella Sorace. So thank you so much for accepting my invitation, Antonella.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, as I told you, it's always a pleasure. And, you know, I am doing another season of this podcast. I was interviewing science of learning experts, psychologists, neuroscientists. And now I really want to focus on language, how we learn languages, what are the benefits of learning more than one language. And I want to start with you as a language learner, Antonella. So you are obviously bilingual. So you speak at least, Italian. That's your mother tongue, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. That's right.
And
Well,
English.
I can tell you, I'm bilingual in different ways. In fact, right?
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
I learned English as an adolescent, and now it's my main language. I've been living in the UK for a long time, most of my life at this point. But I grew up with a minority language in the background because my mother was from Sardinia. And I wasn't born in Sardinia, but I was born in northern Italy. But my mother was from Sardinia. She never spoke Sardinian to me because she thought it wasn't useful.
Oh, wow.
But
Look at that.
she spoke it with other people, with other relatives. And so I understand everything, but I don't speak it. So I have
Interesting.
passive competence of Sardinian. So I'm not monolingual. I didn't grow up with just one language. And
Look at that.
and I think, this is something that it would be nice to have a better understanding of, whether, knowledge of languages is never the same, right? It could range from almost perfect to just passive or, maybe a little bit and so on. How does that matter?
Wow.
There's a lot that we don't know yet.
That's so true, and that brings me to my own childhood because my dad was Swedish, he's passed. And
Yes.
I was raised in a monolingual environment, basically, because, my dad only spoke Portuguese. He thought, why would you want to learn Swedish? It's not going to be useful, right? They don't
Exactly,
think
yes.
about, the
Yes,
benefits of
yes.
bilingualism. But I can understand some Swedish. I actually made sure I pressured my dad to teach me a little bit when I was about 15. I said, okay, I really want to learn a little bit. And then I learned some. So I
Yes.
can actually watch things. And if I go to Sweden, I can understand some Swedish, but it's really basic, But so
Welcome.
I am bilingual. If I am
Absolutely, you are
considering just
bilingual.
that yes.
And this is one of the things that we know, but many people think that if you're not bilingual unless you have
Yes.
perfect knowledge of more than one language. But the perfect bilingual doesn't exist. We
That's
can come
true.
back to this, right? Because your knowledge of each language varies according to where you are, what you're talking about, who you're talking to, and so on. So
Wow.
yes.
That is very true. I think we think a lot in terms of an ideal, this horizon that we have to get to, but we never get there. But I want to know more about how you got into English, Antonella. So what was it from school? Did you know it was important for your career, or how did you start learning
Well,
English?
no, I mean, I started when I was about 12, so I didn't have a clear idea of my career at that point.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah.
But my parents, again, my mother, didn't value her native language, but definitely, English was becoming important, and so I was encouraged, to start learning it as an adolescent, and then of course I continued, I studied it at school, at
Yep.
the university, and so on and so forth. So English is clearly, the desirable language, right? That
Yes.
everybody has to learn. But as we know, it's not what makes a language desirable is guess what? The degree of economic and political prestige of the country or countries where the language is spoken. But we know that, any language is good from the point of view of bilingualism, right?
Exactly. And I wanted to ask you about that specifically because, of course, people want to learn English to, maybe improve their career prospects or maybe they're just interested like you in, I don't know, maybe understanding literature or, watching movies or series. Like when you are a teenager, you don't think too much about your future career, but any language will give you an advantage, a cognitive advantage, we might think, right? So how does that happen? What are the advantages?
This is what, more recent research actually shows, that, it's the fact of having more than one language in the brain that can give potential advantages, regardless of, which languages and so on. There's still a lot that, I'll tell you in a minute what these advantages seem to be, but, there's still a lot that we don't understand. And, so research goes on all the time. So, what we're saying at the moment is provisional, but we need to understand a lot more. There are benefits of having more than one language, both for children and for adults. For children, for example, it makes children aware at an earlier stage that it is possible to have a different perspective or a different point of view. And this is something that all children discover. A very young baby doesn't know that. But slowly, the children discover that. A bilingual child gets there earlier because they realize that not everybody is bilingual. So they have to choose the right language depending on who they're talking to. And so, this linguistic experience is extended outside the language domain and creates, a better ability to take, understand that there are other points of view, other perspectives, and this can be positive, right?
Yes. Can I say, is it fair to say that maybe bilingualism can lead to more empathy or I remember when I was studying at the University of Bristol, theory of mind and understanding.
Theory of mind, these are all, different names, for the phenomenon that I've just described, theory of mind or, empathy, being able to put yourself in another person's shoes, basically, and understand, things from their perspective. This is one aspect of the effects of bilingualism, in
very good.
Children. And then both in children and in adults, there is a lot of research on, first of all, linguistic advantages, so learning a third language or a fourth language when you start from more than one is easier than when you start with only one.
Yes.
And this is true both for children and for adults. And then there is a lot of research on the way we pay attention to things. So we have to pay attention to what we're doing, no matter what, because otherwise we don't do it well. And we have to resist the distractions, that can come from, many things, right? Different thoughts or noises or whatever. So paying focused attention is an ability that it's good to have.
Definitely.
And some research shows that having more than one language actually favors, this ability to focus attention and ignore distractions. But this, it's not uncontroversial because obviously it doesn't happen in every single case. It hasn't been found in every single study. But this is because you're not bilingual only in one way. You're not either bilingual or monolingual. You can be bilingual in many different ways. And so this is what we were saying at the beginning. We need to understand the different kinds of bilingual experiences and how, these differences may affect, these phenomena that have been studied, for example. Language distance, is important, whether you speak two very similar languages or two very distant languages or something in between. this is one aspect that, we are studying at the moment. We don't fully understand.
Wow, yeah.
And so on and so forth, yes.
That's why this is such a fascinating field to me, because when I think of language, and I was teaching my students, language is not just one thing. We think of language in terms of, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and all of that. So we can be, as you said, there are so many different ways of being bilingual. I can actually be quite fluent orally, in a language, but I might not know how to write it well, or I can know I can read Italian very well, but I cannot speak well, so I have to so those things there are so many different combinations, right, Antonella? Yeah.
Exactly. Very different combinations and very different kinds of experiences. So we have to understand, as researchers, but also people having to do with bilingualism in their everyday life. Yeah. They have to understand that, bilingualism doesn't mean to be perfect, and perfection doesn't exist. And it's not that you're either bilingual or monolingual. You can be bilingual to very different degrees. And we were talking about passive knowledge of a language, for example. That's a kind of bilingualism along a continuum that we're trying to explore and understand better.
Perfect. And let me ask you a little bit about how research is conducted in this area, because I remember studying Ellen Bialystok's paper, 2004. Yes. Executive functions and the bilingual experience. Exactly. So how do we know that bilingualism actually affects our executive functions? What do we do? How do researchers work with that?
Well, we do experiments. I mean, Ellen Bialystok was a pioneer in the field, obviously, and we all learned, quite a lot from her. But basically, you can do experiments. You can do experiments in the lab, and that involves quantitative research, so collecting data, from as big, a sample as possible, because then, you can generalize. But more and more, we understand that we need also more in-depth qualitative research. Yeah. So we need to combine, quantitative research and qualitative research in a way that I think, it's fair to say that we're still exploring. So labs, research in the lab, is very important. And labs can be of very different kinds, psycholinguistics, to study cognitive and linguistic factors, but also neuroscience, to see how the brain reacts,
neuroimaging studies, I might include there. Yeah,
really, exactly. So we need, my philosophy is that none of us is an expert of everything. Yeah. So we need to work together. We need to join forces. We need to combine different kinds of expertise, which is not always easy.
Exactly.
We have to try.
I love this. When I was one of the first reasons that actually drove me or led me to, creating this podcast is this idea of inter and transdisciplinarity, like talking to people from different areas to help us understand learning better and learning languages better. And I always ask myself, okay, so there are many people there who claim that bilingualism will do this or that, will delay certain features or affect. There are a lot of myths about bilingualism, right, Antonella? Things that people. Yeah. So can you mention one or two and then tell us why?
Can I say that we are at the lucky time? I'm being ironic, where we have the old misconceptions about bilingualism as well as some new misconceptions about bilingualism. So the old misconceptions, that a child gets confused, if they're exposed to more than one language, or, they can have delays in other areas of development, and things like that, right? The same applies to, older children who migrate to another language environment. Many, not only parents, but teachers think that, the home language is a disadvantage. And so, if children have to, learn a new language, having another language at home it's not very good, right? So we can come back about what can be done about this, when we talk about
Yes.
public engagement. So another old misconception that if you're an adult, you can't learn a language
Yeah,
well. I mean,
that's
of
a
course,
big one.
you need to be a child. How can you learn a language well if you're an adult?
Yeah.
But the new misconceptions out of, misreading some of the research, right? So, if your child has more than one language, they're more intelligent. They can become
Yeah.
geniuses.
I heard that one too. Yes. Yeah. It's
And
interesting. Yeah.
yeah,
Just to add something to that,
yeah,
I think now there's a boom of bilingual programs or bilingual curricula here in
yeah.
Brazil and all over the world. And I think that's their sales pitch, when they go to school and they say, we have a bilingual program, we're going to turn your kids into geniuses. It doesn't work like that, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Or another
Yeah.
question that I get often asked, even by journalists, is it true that if you're bilingual, you don't get Alzheimer's?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I always say, I wish that would be
Yeah.
wonderful. Unfortunately, it's not true because, as we know, research is showing in some studies that some of the initial symptoms of certain kinds of dementia can be delayed in active bilinguals. Delayed. I mean, it doesn't mean that, people don't get the disease. If they have a genetic predisposition
Of
to get this
course.
disease, they get it anyway. But it might start later, and even having 3-4 years of independent life can be a big advantage.
Of course.
Even if you end up, and bilingualism is not the only kind of experience that can do this, so it's not magic, but it's
Of course.
one type of experience that is probably more common than many others. And so, that would be good. But it's misunderstood, sometimes intentionally, I think,
I
in
agree.
the direction of, it's
Yeah.
magic. It's magic.
And that's an interesting observation because what is it that bilingualism does to the brain that it makes the brain, delay symptoms of some kinds of dementia, makes it perhaps pay more attention, focused attention on what are some of the things that we
I
get?
think it's fair. I mean, first of all, this is not my field, right? I don't work on aging and pathological aging and so on.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it's even fully understood, what happens. Clearly, it's a kind of experience that, activates, certain areas of the brain. And that might be one of the factors that causes, a potential delay in the appearance of these symptoms. Probably not the only one. And as I said, there are other experiences that can have similar effects. So we need to compare. And there are people comparing, for example, bilingualism with musicality or being musical and, having played the instruments or an instrument for many years, so we need more data and we need to compare different kinds of experiences also to have a more realistic view
Definitely.
of these effects. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you said, okay, this is not exactly your area. So I would like you to tell us a little bit about your area, how you got into this area, and what are you studying? What do you study in this area, Antonella?
Well, I started from second language acquisition, right?
Okay.
I mean, many years ago. So adults who learn another language, not as children, but as adults. And then I expanded my research interest to bilingualism, over the lifespan, including children and including, older adults, although I'm not specifically working on aging and bilingualism. So I'm interested in bilingualism over the lifespan, essentially. Well, I've worked on several things. So I've worked on adults who reach a very high level of competence in a second language, which is possible. Again, remember, one of the misconceptions is that if you're an adult, you can't learn a language well. Obviously, an adult has less time than a child.
That's
They
very
have
true.
other things to worry about, a
Bills
job,
to pay.
a family, bills to pay, and so on. A child, can be fully immersed in the language and doesn't have to
Yes.
worry about all of this, quite apart from, cognitive changes, obviously due to development and so on. But anyway, it is possible to reach a high level of competence. And so we studied, these, what used to be called near native speakers. And to be honest, I changed the term. I don't use the term near native anymore, because that implies a comparison with native speakers. So the native speaker is the ideal, the target.
Exactly.
And if you're very good at another language, you are almost there, but not quite. This is what near native suggests, right?
But here's the thing: what native? Because that's especially when we're talking about English, the native speakers abound. They exist everywhere. There are tens of countries where English is spoken. And
but I was coming to this. So people can reach a very high level. They still have variability, so they can vary in certain areas of the grammar, not across the board, but in certain areas of the grammar. And there are many reasons why this can happen, and it would be too long, to go into detail. But there is residual, what you can call residual variation. Now, the interesting thing, and the other thing that I've been studied, is what happens in your native language when you learn another language.
Okay.
And this is, that this has implications for the concept of native speaker, right? Because you're not a native speaker for life. If you learn another language, your native language actually changes, again, in very subtle ways, only in certain areas of the grammar, which happen to be similar to the areas of grammar where we find residual variation in non-native speakers. So what we are exploring at the moment is that if you're a good bilingual, like you and me, right?
Yeah, we're good examples.
Our languages, sort of get closer to each other. So there is some kind of reconfiguration of the linguistic space in our brain that makes bilingualism more effective. And that means that, you're not the same, your native language is natural if your native language changes. It doesn't remain the same. This is absolutely, absolutely normal, but it needs to be fully understood. Because again, we have this idea of the native speaker for life, the native speaker as the point of reference that we compare everybody with. But in fact, and I suspect, and this is my hypothesis, that, the better you are at learning languages, the more this reconfiguration of all your languages takes place.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that reminds me, when I was teaching my students, that we talked about Edna Andrews, Duke University, and Yubin Abutalebi, I think he's in Italy. San Raffaele, I think. And there was a paper that he published. I think it was a meta-analysis showing that the more proficient you were, the more similar the neural substrate for L1, L2, like, that was very interesting to think that. So as an adult, if you keep going, if you actually study and use the language for a very long time, and you become a very competent user of the language, so there will be more similarities between, the pathways, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this is important because, again, this is something completely misunderstood. If a language, so bilinguals, changes, natural changes in the native language happen. So, and again, this is normal, but particularly when we're talking about minority languages and, preserving minority languages, people think that, languages are getting corrupted, they are getting contaminated, they are, they are going down the drain. And, in fact, if any language that is still alive naturally changes. If a language doesn't change anymore, it's dead.
It's dead.
And,
That's true. Like Latin and ancient Greek,
right.
you know.
Yeah, well, exactly. And so, we should understand that language change is absolutely normal. And it's probably due to bilingualism, multilingualism. Many of these languages are, spoken with another language, a majority language or more than one majority language. So in order to keep them alive, also in order to do effective policies, to maintain these languages, these facts need to be fully understood.
Very
and this
good.
is what we're trying to do with my public engagement center.
Yes, Bilingualism Matters, right?
Bilingualism Matters.
Yeah, so I want to ask you, what exactly does the institution do, and how can we find out more so we can support it?
Thank you very much. That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
I started Bilingualism Matters now, a good, nearly 15 years ago as a mother of bilingual children.
Yeah.
Because I realized how little people know about bilingualism. Not only that, how many wrong ideas there are around.
Yeah.
Because bilingualism is not, as I often say, it's not like astrophysics, something completely alien that people say, oh, I don't know anything about this. Everybody thinks they know enough, right? And there are so many wrong ideas. So I thought, well, some of us do research in this area. We have some responsibility to make sure that, the gap between research and society gets smaller. Okay?
Definitely.
So I started Bilingualism Matters very small, from Edinburgh, parents and teachers in Edinburgh. But very soon we started attracting attention from other areas, from other fields, from other people. We started working with governments. We started expanding outside the Edinburgh, outside the UK. And now we have an international network of I want to say partners rather than branches, because branches suggest, that we're a big bank, with a lot of a lot of power.
That's why I love languages too. Every word means something, right? Or a couple of things. Yeah, yeah.
But we have 35 partners all over the world, 4 continents.
Yeah.
And more to come. So yes, so we have the opportunity, the possibility, not always the capacity, but the possibility of comparing different kinds of experiences for different combinations of languages, for different political settings, and so on, and see, comparing, different ways of understanding multilingualism, but also acting, in favor of multilingualism. Yeah,
and I've seen that there are some events that sponsored or are hosted by Bilingualism Matters, right? So you have symposia and you talk about research.
We have a symposium every year. The last one was in Edinburgh. Now it's in Edinburgh every 2 years. And every 2 years, one of our partners takes over the responsibility to organize, and the next one will be in Milan.
Oh, excellent!
Yes, so it will be in Italy.
Yeah.
But I find really useful to be able to communicate. First of all, to communicate with non-academics. I think we learn to do research better. We learn to understand bilingualism, multilingualism in context much better. Also, being able to communicate in a clear way. This is something that all academics, should be able to do.
Yeah.
But we're not always able to do this because we go to our specialized conferences and we speak our jargon and we assume that everybody understands.
And journalists will normally sensationalize what you said in those, like when they will say something that didn't really happen. But yes, so I think it's important.
Absolutely. So I think, public engagement and research should really go together.
I agree. I couldn't agree more, Antonella. And I will link everything people need to know about Bilingualism Matters. But can you
Yeah.
tell us the website where you can find more information?
Yeah, you can if you type Bilingualism Matters, you will find it. I can put it on.
Yeah. Oh, don't worry. I can link to this episode,
yeah.
and then people can find it.
I'm sure you can find it.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
definitely.
it would be wonderful to have a branch in Brazil.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of initiatives in Brazil now about bilingual education, bilingualism. And yes, definitely. There's one. We've just started Abrasep. It's a Associação Brasileira de Educação Bilingue, I think. So it's the Brazilian Association of Bilingual Education that they had an event here in my city a couple of weeks ago, and they're going all over Brazil. So maybe we can do something, because this is such.
I think it would be good, to work together. As I said at the beginning, I really think that working together is a wonderful thing, both in research and in public engagement. We need to join forces rather than competing with one another, which it's not very productive.
That's
we
so
need
true.
To work together.
So true. Yeah. So, and now moving towards the end of our conversation, I want to tell you something that I've started doing. I am actually going to China for 2 months because I'm going to teach some teachers there. And I decided to start learning Chinese Mandarin, which is, as you can probably tell.
I'm very jealous. I wish I could do the same, but
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's not been easy. I have to tell you, Antonella. It's such a different language, It's a tonal language. The vowels, they have 5 different tones, but based on your research and what you know, so you said adults can still learn. We can learn, of course. It doesn't happen overnight. But what are some tips you can give people who want to learn a language? I mean, get a teacher, probably. But what else can we do based on the research?
Get a teacher and find ways of, getting exposed to the language and possibly interact, with people in the language, which is not always easy. And also being happy with what you can achieve, because some people get very discouraged or frustrated at the beginning. I can't do it. I'm terrible at languages. It doesn't mean that, obviously there are people who are faster than others, like in many other fields, right? There are people who are better at music. They are more musical than others, and this is accepted and so on. But I think I think there's a difference between learning the grammar and learning pronunciation, and because learning pronunciation also involves retraining your articulatory organs, which is not always straightforward, not always easy.
That's so true. And you mentioned before, near native, and there is this idea that circulates in English language teaching and TESOL, teaching English as to speakers of other languages, of getting a native teacher, a native speaking teacher, a teacher who was born in the country, who has lived their whole lives in the country, because that's the best role model. But so what can you tell us about that? Is that really true? Does that really matter? Or is it more about the qualification of that teacher, not where they were born necessarily?
Yeah, I would say the qualifications, I think teachers, this is another thing that a gap that we try to bridge. Very often teachers don't have enough training about how people learn languages at different ages. And I think, this should be a fundamental component of teacher training and teacher, updating and so on and so forth. So I would say that, a well-trained teacher is ideal, right? Even if they're non-native, right? But again, I think, being exposed, this is something that we recommend to families with children as well, being exposed to natural variation. So people naturally speaking in different ways. It's a fundamental component of language learning for a child, but also, language learning for an adult. So, hearing the language being spoken in different ways, which is absolutely normal. No two individuals speak exactly in the same way.
Exactly.
So we recommend, to families, so if they want to maintain their home language, to create a mini community if there isn't a big community already. And this is what I did, for Italian, for example, when my children were
yes.
young. We created, a mini community. But I think it's true for adults as well. So looking for opportunities, to interact with Chinese speakers, for example.
Excellent.
And that would be fantastic. Now,
Wonderful.
obviously, there is artificial intelligence that can help to some extent. It can't
Yes.
replace human interaction. This is what we say, because many people think, now ChatGPT or whatever, program can immediately translate, what I want to say. But, that's not the same as learning. It can help,
Sure.
but natural human interaction is very important.
I'm so glad you said that, because I forgot to ask about artificial intelligence, and people are using all sorts of chatbots to practice. But like you said, if you use that instead of actually trying out, you're not really learning. You're just, I remember using Google Translate when traveling to other countries, because of course I wouldn't be able to pick up the language in just a couple of days. And,
Right. Sure.
But I know I haven't learned. I will not learn if I keep doing that. I really have to use the language, right, in meaningful context with people.
Unfortunately, the presence of artificial intelligence in some places can even discourage people, or I live in a country, the so-called Anglosphere, where people are not motivated to learn languages because
everybody speaks their language.
Everybody speaks English. Why should we bother? And now, all you need is press a button and you get a full translation, and you get, but this is not learning. I mean, it can contribute, it can help learning, but real learning involves human interaction.
Wonderful. And I am moving towards the end, the last part, Antonella. I just want to ask you about your books there, because, to geek out a little bit.
These are not all my books, right? I haven't written all this.
Yes. Well, but I'm interested. I know I will link your research and where people can find what you do, but I'm interested also in literature, and because I have a lot of research books here, but I can see on the shelf there that I have Bram Stoker, Dracula, and I have 1984, George Orwell. I have Aldous Huxley. Is that important also for you to keep learning, for you to actually achieve a high level of competency? Let's say, should you read in the language? The literature. Yeah.
Definitely. It can help, not only your, learning mechanisms, and learning proficiency, but also your motivation. I mean, if you get really involved, in a book, that you really like, of course, you learn more. So, and this is what, we recommend to children as well. Parents, give your children, books in your native language, that will motivate them, to maintain it. Because, if they get really involved, they're more, willing to speak the language.
Wonderful. Do you still read any sort of literature in Italian?
Of course.
So do you use your Italian quite often still?
Use it in the sense of writing in Italian, not very much.
Okay.
In the last few years, I must have co-written maybe 2 or 3 papers in Italian, but most of if you want to be read, in academia, you write in English.
In English, yeah. That is true.
And so, yes, most of my publications are in English, but I love reading in Italian. I do.
Wonderful. Yes. Yeah. And so the last question I'm asking you, Antonella, so what would you say to teachers or parents who want to understand more about bilingualism? What are the final, let's say, takeaways, for people who want to understand more? What should they do? And then tell us where we can find you, where we can find your work, Okay, so that of course, I will link everything here, but just,
Yes.
so people who are listening can find your work somewhere on the web.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, what I would say is that, yes, information about language learning can be found, on the Bilingualism Matters website, which could be better than it is, of course, because,
Sure.
yeah, I mean, you need the capacity, to update it regularly and things like that. But there are also, a couple of books, for example, that I could recommend. I can give you the titles.
Perfect. Yes.
Easy to read books, that could provide a good introduction to what it means to be bilingual or multilingual.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, anything that can encourage people to value their languages and, appreciate, how lucky they are, to speak more than one language.
Yes.
This is what we say, with speakers of minority languages. I mean, I do a lot of work in Sardinia because of my background, right? Sardinia is
Wonderful.
part of my background. And
it's such a beautiful place, so you're lucky.
Yeah, well, it is a very beautiful place
Yes.
as well.
Yeah.
But, when I speak there, I say, you guys are very lucky. You have a resource here that you should really appreciate, invest in, and cultivate, because, it's such a fantastic, you're really lucky to have another language here. And this applies to many places in the world.
Yeah. So parents, I hope you don't think that you're messing your your children's brains, or you're delaying anything. No, please do teach them your language. Right. That's the idea.
You're giving them a great gift.
Yes. Wonderful.
By doing this.
So thank you so much, Antonella, again, for accepting my invitation. I could talk, the whole day, but I will link. Yes, but I know you're busy. But I will link all the information about Bilingualism Matters, your book recommendations, and where people can find you. And you folks, thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for more Learning Cosmos podcast episodes. So thank you, Antonella.
Thank you. Thank you.